Okay. So for all official purposes, the recording has started. So let me go ahead and introduce the panelists. So we have extremely honored people with us, four members from our peer institutes. So I would start with Sally Baker from UC Berkeley. She is ITCS Service Desk Manager, and Lisa Kemp from UCLA IT Services. She's a Director of Customer Engagement. And we have Mark Castoras, I think I pronounced your last name right, Mark, from Duquesne University. He's Director of IT Support Services. And finally, Dave Zavaston from UC Davis. And he is the Director of Customer Services Manager. Data Center Services Manager. Sorry about that.
Your head's covering, your picture's
yeah.
covering.
I should have moved it to the other corner. So without further ado, I would hand over to Sally for taking over the presentation. So I will stop sharing, Sally, so you can share your presentation.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to kind of start off with where we started. I borrowed some of these slides from other presentations that we've done, and we were trying to sell this to our IT internal groups when we went live with this at the very beginning. So we just sort of talked about what's in it for them, and it has a lot to do with aggregating all related tickets. Service desk spent a lot of time in the past trying to close tickets out. The biggest benefit that we've derived from all of this is the communication. We got consistent communication out where we were not communicating very well before when there was a major incident going on. And then closing out all of those child tickets was another big time saver. So those were all things that we used to sell the tool. The criteria that we use on a major incident when we open one is that there are a moderate or large number of campus customers impacted. And that could be either a degradation of service or loss of service, or a big group of VIPs. So if the chancellor and the Cal Hall where the chancellor resides is down, that's a problem. So we open a major. The biggest thing to remember for all of our leaders in IT is that there is no hard and fast rules. We had a lot of people with trouble that wanted this to be black and white. Here's the box that it fits into, and it really does not fit into a black box. What we did say is you cannot make a mistake. So if you open a major and it didn't turn out to really be a major or fall under the criteria, there's no repercussions. We would rather you err on the side of caution. And when we do the incident review at the end, we'll talk about whether it should or shouldn't have been. There's no repercussions. This workflow kind of helps us determine what stream are you in, who are you, and where do you fit into the whole process. So the pictures, you know, everybody learns differently. This really, really helped a lot of people when we first got started, especially. We still have people ask for it and use it today. So it really, really helped. We also did a RACI chart for those that learn better that way. And that kind of helped make the things a little bit more between the black and white lines for those that needed that. And then because we have no repercussions for opening one wrong, there are no bad examples of major incidents for us. So what I chose to put up here is kind of a really small example of when we did open a major, but it really wasn't impacting too many, which was our most recent Kaltura incident. The incident was on the Kaltura end, so that was a third party for us. We only had about 20 contacts in total, and it spanned almost a week of time. But we knew that if it went any farther south than it had already gone, it could have really had a big impact. So our entire campus uses Kaltura during teaching and learning. And so we had it open. It was open for a week. There were only 20 contacts on it. Even when we closed it, it was a small one, erred on the side of caution, all was well. Wi-Fi, we've had Wi-Fi and Aruba problems since the beginning of fall semester. So August, end of August. And we've got 1,500 contacts on there. And I can tell you that way more people than that have been impacted. We still have residual effects of Aruba problems. So we still have this Wi-Fi major incident open.
I can see you guys use the same prioritization scheme that most IT shops use. Everything is number one. So well done there, Sally.
Yeah.
Everything is number one.
Oh yeah, thank you. That's a good one. Well, you know, it's a major. Major is a major.
That's right.
Yeah, so the Wi-Fi Aruba issue goes on today. It's not as impactful as it was in August and September, but we still get 10, 15 tickets a day probably. We know that there is fatigue with our customer base in reporting Wi-Fi. They've just sort of thrown up their hands and say it could be better. They don't really say that. They say other words that I won't say on here. But the team is working hard at it. They're working with Aruba and we'll get there. So as far as the major goes though, what I wanted to get across is the benefit of having that major open still is that I can do twice a week now is kind of what we're down to. I can do a communication out to those contacts that are added as child incidents to the major. In one fell swoop, I can twice a week give them an update on where we are, right? You know, the team continues to work. They're sort of fluffy right now. There's not a lot of concrete changes going in that's making a huge impact, but at least they're getting communication and they know that things are still happening. During the major, when something of that scale is going on, to be able to update all of those contacts twice a day or 3 times a day, depending on the outage, is invaluable. I could do it with one click, right? I type it once, I click, and it goes out to however many customers have already reached us. My team, which is the service desk, I cannot even add up the number of resource hours that it saves while we have the ability to add tickets to a major and be able to communicate out quickly. And then on the backside, being able to resolve those tickets with one fell swoop, it's just a joyous day. So that's all I've really got on that. And I hope people have questions because I'm better at answering questions than I'm at presenting, but we're gonna go through the panel and put your questions in the chat and we will get to them at the end.
Yes, there are already few questions, Sally. I will get to that at the end.
Great.
I think Lisa is up now.
Hi, everyone. I'm trying to do something fancy here. Fancy for me. Okay, there it is. Woohoo! Okay, so here we are. This is something I think that Mark taught us. Okay, so welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm happy to talk through what UCLA has done in terms of major incident process planning. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how we got here and how we put together this program to really address some of the primary issues around major incident management. Wait, okay, there it is. So we essentially, I wanted to start with why we started this process and why now. It's been I don't know, a burr under our saddles for quite a long time, and I think a lot of you are in that boat. And a couple of things happened that really pulled things together. One was the a terrible incident that really took out our single sign-on, which essentially rendered all of our systems unavailable for the better part of Sunday, right before finals week. So this was bad. Piling onto that, a week later, something else happened. So there was just kind of this outcry. I mean, we have got to do something, and we've got to do it fast. In the meantime, we had just set up a new status page to be able to communicate status a little bit more cleanly to campus. And we had started a continual process improvement project where we had pulled together people to really try to address this issue. And because of these issues and you know, the major incidents that did happen, we had a lot of leadership attention, shall we say. So there was a lot of interest in really getting something resolved. So all of these things contributed to, you know, us being able to really push this forward. And here we go. So essentially, we focused on a couple of things. One was really defining roles of what happens during a major incident and who's in charge of what. We defined a major incident manager and a communications coordinator, two people, and we used a rotating set of roles. So these aren't people that we hired. This is you know, mostly managers and supervisors within the organization that were volunteered to be on a weekly rotation. We also spent a lot of time defining and documenting processes. And we have a run book and you know, a Slack channel and a variety of resources. And the service management team owns the whole process. So they're really the anchor. They, you know, make sure that the reminders are sent out and they, you know, keep the systems updated, track tickets, and kind of move things from the incident into the problem status. Let's see. So we had two goals in mind. One, we wanted to improve the customer experience in which people were getting information better, more consistently, and really being able to make decisions and communicate with their constituents based on the information we're able to provide. And we needed to do it faster. So there was a lot of emphasis on really speeding things up and building confidence that we will get information to people in a predictable way. And also, of course, to increase operational efficiency. We needed to reduce the amount of time we were taking to respond when something went wrong. And also, you know, by clarifying these roles and clarifying a few functions and systems to enable this, we're able to really reduce the time to respond and resolve these problems. So a little bit more about the roles and responsibilities. The major incident manager is responsible for gathering the needed experts. This might not be a person that you know, is a networking expert, but you know, they're going to need to know who is and who needs to come in and solve the problem. And we have about 6 to 8 people in rotation, and we rotate once a week on Wednesdays at noon, in case anybody's wondering. Alongside this function, we also have a communications coordinator. So this enables the major incident manager to really focus on solving the problem. And the communications coordinator is in touch with the support center, with end user requests, you know, just both feeding in information of, you know, what's going on in the environment with what's going on, what information about the incident that we need to communicate to campus. So they make sure that the status page is up to date, and you know, making sure that there's updates on a regular basis, and notifying leadership, and you know, so they're working on the outward communication so the technical folks can fix the problem. And we found that to be really beneficial. And the service management team, like I say, is the anchor. They make sure that you know, the processes work, that the you know, reminders about, you know, who's on call are sent, and that's been a tremendous benefit. And I really, you know, want to emphasize that having an organizational anchor in this team is critical. So basically how it works, and I won't go into it too much, but we use ServiceNow, by the way. So we log an incident, and we've got a pop-up screen that says, hey, this looks like a major incident, is it? And then the person logging the incident has the option to say, you know, yes, it is. Let's, you know, initiate the process, and off it goes. Email is generated to with a persistent link to a Slack channel. And we also have our data center operations folks calling the major incident manager and the communications coordinator. We use Slack for our primary communication, and within Slack, we initiate a Zoom so that relevant people can jump on really quick. And then the team works the problem, go, go, go. And then when it's all resolved, tickets resolved, it moves into problem, and the service management team takes it from there. The trigger conditions are all critical incidents, and I think Sally noted this as well. We wanted to reduce the barrier to reporting a major incident. So anybody that sees something going on can trigger this, and I can talk about impacts of that in a second. And we do give them information so they can decide, is this a major incident or not? And then we rely on a lot of judgment. So some implementation challenges we had is really making sure that we note the care and feeding involved. It's not a one-time thing that that we launch and then kind of relax. We need to keep mindful of taking note of feedback and things like that. Our enabling tools were really helpful, and this is always something that we like to tinker with. But we use Slack, we use Zoom, we have people on the phone if these things aren't working. And identifying and scheduling the team was another challenge, and this is more of an organizational challenge than a technical one. So we did spend a lot of time training people to be in these roles and really working with leadership to ensure that people do take part in this. And like I say, we provided training, and we work on evaluating progress, and that's underway. We just launched this earlier this calendar year. So a couple of lessons learned. The response and resolution time improved vastly. I mean, this is just based on anecdotal evidence for the most part. So we're working on ways to measure progress a little more concretely. One thing that does happen sometimes is that we do have false triggers. People will, say it's a major incident where really maybe not. So that's just something that happens, but it's pretty rare. I mean, most of the time it really is a major incident, and we really wanted to develop a culture in which reporting bad things happening is not only okay, but it's encouraged. It's like, please report things that are happening, and we'll deal with what happens next. And then keeping up with the staff rotation, people's schedules, people's vacation calendars, and like I say, the service management team really sort of is our anchor in making sure that these roles are covered. And finally, teamwork is essential. We have to keep in touch with each other. We have to really respect the roles and responsibilities of the people that are working these problems. So those were our primary takeaways. And I think I have gone to my 7 minutes. So thank you all. Looking forward to the discussion after, and I will turn it over to, who's next? Mark, are you next?
Mark, yeah.
Mark's next. Okay, let me stop sharing.
Sorry, I was muted. So yeah, Marquette Source, Duquesne University, now not muted. And I think most of us, probably not just the panelists, but probably every single person in this room as a participant is somewhere on that continuum between totally immature in terms of all their service processes and totally like mature, right? Like we're somewhere in the middle of that continuum like everyone. So hopefully that's the idea of this session today, right? Is that we can all kind of learn from each other. But I'm with Duquesne, and I direct basically all the front-facing services within IT at Duquesne. And let me just pull my stool around here if I can here. And all right, so there I am. I am going to share with you some brief things. I'm in the interest of time, I'm not necessarily going to read word for word through all of these, but the bottom line is you want to think about major incidents sort of in the, what can you be doing proactively before major incidents occur? what do you need to be doing during major incidents? And then there are quite a number of things actually you can be doing after a major incident, after you've made it through the other end of a major incident, just in terms of, capturing lessons learned and things like that. So these are some standard, pre-major incident kinds of things, right? First of all, making sure you have good problem management in place. By the way, I saw through the chat, somebody mentioned something about incident management and problem management. And they said, are major incidents and problems the same thing? And I am going to tell you absolutely, irrefutably no. A lot of institutions, I think, make this mistake, but they're not. When you have a major incident and it's escalating, that doesn't mean it suddenly becomes problem management. A lot of people have that misconception. Problem management is a completely proactive process. It's something you do to analyze, metrics about services, looking at previous tickets, looking at, reoccurrence of problems in the past, and ultimately trying to do things to basically, analyze and address those things, again, in a proactive way. So don't confuse sort of major incidents with problem management. That's not the distinction between incident management and problem management, but I digress a bit. Obviously, you want to make sure you have major incident roles established, right? You should have a major incident manager, right? You should have certain protocols established, right? You take your kids to the amusement park. Usually one of the first conversations you have with them is something along the lines of, hey, kids, if we get separated, everybody meet at, Pavilion A, right? Like that's just a common thing. So you want to have those kind of protocols when you're in the middle of a major incident that may be affecting some of the services and things that you even use to communicate, right? So you've got to have sort of a protocols established, and along with those lines, you've got to have contingencies, right? You typically have like a war room. Folks here have mentioned Slack and other Zoom and other shared platforms for having sort of a war room to deal with things from a technical level. And I'll talk a little bit about what we do in that regard too. But those are sort of pre-major incident things. And then obviously during a major incident, you want lots of engagement with, you want those people who are involved in service design. If that's internal, you want engineering involved. If it's mostly a vendor, cloud platform, obviously you want to try to get the vendor engaged as soon as possible. You want to have, sort of obviously as many folks at sort of the service design level engaged as possible. Because again, presumably if it's a major incident, it's something that, an attempt to just resolve it quickly is not working, right? Obviously you want your incident manager and most especially your IT communications manager involved in like the conversations, the war room, what have you. You have to take care of sort of immediate messaging, right, through like your service desk, like, making sure you're providing a quick status so you're not getting bombarded. But then obviously there are ongoing messaging as the situation unfolds, and hopefully as it is getting resolved or close to resolved. And that's why you need an IT comms manager. And again, typically you need some kind of a platform, a war room, so to speak, a virtual war room, whatever, where people can quickly get together and actually hash out what's going on, review the change calendar, and try to figure things out as quickly as possible, right? And then post major incident, these are definitely critical things too. You want to be able to go back and document the timeline and try to figure out what happened and when. Again, all in the interest not, of trying to figure out like what we could have done differently, right? So, if you're in a Zoom, obviously just doing something as simple as hitting record. So you kind of capture the whole conversation that's occurring among the engineers or what have you. Doing a formal major incident review is always a great idea for any highly impactful major incident, which presumably if it's a major incident, it was highly impactful. So again, not towards finger pointing or blame, but more towards, hey, what did we learn? How can we set up the service and not have this kind of failure again? What do we need to change now about either the service or the process in general? All those kinds of things. And then finally, from that meeting, presumably there are action items and things that need to be followed up on. So you definitely want to make sure that you're doing those kinds of things before, during, and after a major incident. So I think the key for my lessons learned is coordination and communication is key, because in the throes of a major incident where, something really critical is down or whatever that's affecting potentially the mission of the institution, obviously you need to make sure that you've thought things out in advance. So you have these pre-established protocols, you have tools in place, and you have the comms in place to be able to take that burden away from your technical folks who are trying to solve the problem. Much like Sally, we have sort of a swim lane based flow diagram. I think the key is not to focus on this whole diagram because that's just incident management at large, but really what part of that is major incident? And really it's usually when you get down to the point where you're trying to apply a fix over and over again or apply fixes and they're not working, right? Like the thing is still down. or it's just something that's so broadly impactful that it sort of elevates the major incident immediately. And I think, I think Lisa mentioned, of course, obviously if it involves, VIPs in the institution or whatever, that also obviously can escalate the level of the incident to a major incident. So in terms of like setting up platforms, obviously this depends on your institution's collaboration tools, right? We've got Slack institutions, we've got Office 365 institutions, Teams and Zoom and all sorts of other things. Because we're an Office 365 institution and we leverage Teams a lot in general to collaborate and share artifacts and stuff, it was a natural fit for us to leverage a Teams space to be able to, again, if nothing else, just collect artifacts and have sort of real-time synchronous chats, about the incident. So that's what we did. We set up a war room, and again, everybody kind of knows, hey, if there's a problem, go to the war room. But sometimes you also want to have sort of that, actual voice and video discussion too. And so, yes, you could use Teams for that as well. We tend to be a Zoom shop when it comes to actually having interactive, conversations and whatnot. And part of this is just the way it can be scheduled way in advance, all that kind of stuff. So we tend to leverage Zoom. And so we actually have, in addition to a war room, which is on Teams, we also have sort of a sister platform to that, which is our War Zoom, as we call it. And so, again, this is something we've pre-established. Presumably, everybody, this is a snapshot right out of my phone's, directory. Presumably, this is a directory contact we share across the IT faction within Duquesne, and everybody has this, so everybody can quickly get on, whether it's through their smartphone or through their computer or whatever. And I think that, again, my pro tip for this is consider using the recording capability within Zoom to just record things for the ultimate purpose of sort of dissecting and documenting the timeline when you finally do get things resolved and you want to document exactly what went on. Now, of course, the problem is that, you tell the kids, hey, if anything goes wrong, some catastrophe, everybody meet at Pavilion A. Well, what if you go to Pavilion A that you saw the last time you were at this theme park and they've torn down Pavilion A? So like, oh crap. So you need contingency. So what if the problem you're having is an institution-wide networking problem and no one can actually get to the internet? Well, then obviously having a Zoom or a Teams war room isn't really going to help you in that situation. So you definitely want to have some kind of contingency. We use just a plain old PSTN based audio conference calling mechanism. And so again, it's the kind of thing where our protocol is like, hey, if you try to get into like the Team site or the War Zoom more than 3 times and you're not successful, then go to what we call Circle. And again, my pro tip there is just make sure that whatever contingency you pick is really like sort of just completely outside of your tech ecosystem. Everyone can get to this from their mobile phone. So whether your telephony systems are down or your network is down or whatever, most likely the people that need to be able to get together can still get together via their smartphones or their dumb phones and something like an audio conferencing service. So that's basically what we've set up as sort of our set of contingencies, sort of Pavilion A, Pavilion B, so to speak. And I think that's it. So for that, I'm going to graduate to Dave.
So I've been sort of paying attention to the chat, and I've slowly been adjusting to try and take little notes so that I can cover some of it. Let's see if I can bring this up.
Real-time slide deck. Way to go, Dave.
Yeah, well, basically the comments at least. Newfangled technology on Zoom. So a lot of the things that we talked about, like how we got here and what led us to major incident, we've already covered. I wanted to focus a little bit more, it's just kind of on our ecosystem, because there's, as we sort of migrated through this and matured through the major incident management, there are like certain challenges. And I remember when we approached these things, we actually sought out advice and counsel from other universities that had done similar things so that we could have these questions answered. So I want to try and cover some of those things. First off, Mark and other folks have already talked about this. It's not just major incident management. Major incident management or incident management in general is dealing with a particular problem that's ongoing. The rest of the things are sort of proactive change management, is the whole idea to prevent incidents to begin with. Problem management is kind of diving deeply into a particular incident that happened that is now in the past, so that you can learn from it and you ask like the whys and figure out how it actually happened. So next time, whether you change, and then that leads into continuous service improvement, where you then change your processes. We've had incidents where it turns out we followed all of our processes and still something went down and we weren't asking the right questions in change management. So that's actually fed back into modifying our KBs to say, oh, well, let's ask about kind of downstream dependencies or things like that. So it's all part of a sort of this ecosystem. This is our process map. I just wanted to throw it up here. It's we basically have 2 ingress points because we have a help desk where most of all of our incidents come in, but then they're basically 6 to 7 p.m. And after that, it goes to our 24/7 operations desk. So both of those groups have the ability to kind of flag something as a major incident, which sort of starts our escalation process. And so the first thing is that the folks at the help desk or in operations, they'll try to duplicate the problem, or so they actually have the power to sort of, and this was actually key. We had some service managers who said, you don't get to like call something a major incident for one of my services if I'm not involved in it. And like, well, okay, if at 10 o'clock at night email is down and we get 3 calls about it and we can verify that it's down and we can't get in touch with the service manager, we're still going to call it a major incident. So one of the things that we did is we actually empowered our frontline folks to kind of initiate this process. There is a second stage to that though, and that is that basically once the frontline desks sort of declare something a major incident, it goes to the major incident manager at UC Davis, that's me, but not just me, it's our entire management team. So if I'm unavailable, anyone else is empowered to declare this, yes, we validate it as a major incident, and then we kind of kick off the rest of the stuff. We have the ability to create Zoom rooms. And when we do that, we actually have we have a requirement that all the managers attend the first triage meeting, the initial call. That way we can make sure, yes, so our AV manager is going to attend, even though we know that it's something related to the network, just to make sure that we have all hands on deck, and then people kind of peel off from there. We also, if we broke it down between a major incident and a critical incident. So incidents are just anything that's not working, anything that's broken. So all of major incident management is really just focusing in on those things that have that critical impact. Right? If someone can't get to wireless and it's a single problem, it's still an incident, but it's not anything we need to deal with. So the first level is kind of defining where a major incident begins. But beyond that, we also defined a critical incident, because oftentimes a major incident could be something that's kind of self-contained. It doesn't have much impact. So you look at sort of the number of people that are impacted, whether they're VIPs, and then you figure out whether you have to kick off this critical incident process. If we do that, that's when we sort of have these other tools available. In some cases, we start a conference call with the CIO. We actually use Warn Me, which has the ability, and we use that for all sort of mass notifications. We have had major incidents that we've declared a critical incident that were so severe and impactful that we sent out Warn Me messages to all the students and staff saying, by the way, this is going on. In part because basically networking was impacted and there was no way that we could get information out to them by other means. So the critical incident process really sort of triggers some of these other things. There were lots of questions around communication. We use PagerDuty, which we found to be, it's a slightly, I don't know, it depends on your budget. I would call it an expensive tool, but it's incredibly useful for going out and paging folks. You can set up escalation schedules. Basically what happens when we declare something to be a major incident, we can send out a PagerDuty page. It includes the Zoom war room, and it automatically goes to all the managers. The managers can then, they set their own escalation policies to say, okay, call me on my cell phone first, and then if I don't answer, send me an SMS or whatever. So it's a really useful tool in that regard. We use Slack for communication internally. So we have a major incidents channel that is always open. And that's kind of a place where people can poke in and say, hey, you know what, central authentication is failing for me. And someone else says, no, it's working for me. It's like, oh yeah, okay, I rebooted my system. And it's really intended for like the technical staff to kind of, bat around ideas. But once we declare something to be a major incident, we actually create a separate channel. That's proven to be really useful. And we had a long debate about this because everybody's in the major incident channel, but if you move them off to someplace else, now some people might miss what's going on. It's nice having everybody in one channel so they can kind of chime in. We sort of decided to lean towards creating separate channels. That way you have a focused conversation on it. This is really useful if you have two major incidents going on at the same time, because you have people saying, hey, I'm rebooting the server. It's like, okay, great. Well, they're talking about two different incidents, and it avoids kind of that crosstalk. The other thing is you can kind of archive this off, and now you have a nice artifact in terms of everything you did around that major incident. We use status page IO. There's been some comment in chat about that, and I know other folks are using that as well. There were some questions around social media. Status page IO has the ability to actually integrate with Twitter. So we post something up to status page and poof, it automatically sends out a tweet. So that's kind of one of the nice features there. And in terms of, I'm trying to look at my notes and make sure that I have all these things covered. In terms of notifying folks and how do we tell people to use a status page and the tweets, what we do is the help desk, every single time they get a request for something like this, I'm having a problem with XYZ. Oh, what's happening is we have a wireless outage in that particular region. We will tell them, check status.ucdavis.edu for updates, or, so we have a little tag in there. That's how we get the message out so that next time, hopefully people know to go there. We've actually struggled. There's one thing that was a little bit difficult for us, and that was the status page is really intended to be a public facing portal where we give broad information, like we're aware of a problem with networking. And that's great for sort of the masses, but we have a large technical community that's really involved, and they like to know deeper what's going on. They have a separate Slack channel, and it's something we struggle with, because if we give too much technical information in the status page or we update there too often, it kind of waters down, it becomes less useful. So, and we're actually kind of going through this right now. We just had a major incident where, in the end, what happened is we started posting to a separate IT channel that is campus-wide, giving updates on it with actual real technical guts and details, and in a sense, the root cause for what was going on. So that's just a consideration for you. And then separately, people ask, what are we using for major incident management, or what are folks using? And this is nice. I just noticed that, okay, so if you're using the new fancy feature for advancing your PowerPoint slides, the little chat box pops up right on above the little commands for moving forward. Anyway, CSI topic. So we use ServiceNow, and first off, yes, we are using the major incident management module. That was one of the questions in chat. We used to use incident alert, and this gets back to deciding when something is an incident versus a major incident. If you do a report on all incidents, you're going to get everything. So how do you kind of isolate those? So we were using incident alert for a long time, which really isn't what it's intended for, but at least you could pull up a list of all the incident alerts and say, here's the ones that we want to focus on in our incident reviews. Now we just deployed the major incident management module, and some of the things we went through there. One thing that's nice is it has a pretty cool dashboard. So you can go straight to that. You can make that your login screen. You can see how many open incidents you have, how many closed ones. In terms of communication and archiving and all of that, one of the things that we focused on, or one of the things we struggled with is, okay, we have Zoom calls, we have Slack, and now we have this major incident. Where are we going to track everything? And so we decided that basically our major incident ticket is the artifact, the source of truth. So the teams know that if you have conversations in Slack where you say, or you go out and you make changes, you do something, all of that ultimately needs to be recorded in here. And so people can cut and paste Slack conversations or do whatever, but it's the responsibility of the service manager to make sure that that ticket is updated. Oh, one other thing in terms of running the major incident management module, if you've ever looked at it, you basically have a list of incidents, 10 incidents that are all talking about email being down. You can take one of those and promote them to be a major incident. What we did is instead create a separate incident and then make all those, the reports, child incidents of that. That way, some client incident isn't the one where all of your technical notes and everything are ending up on. And then you use the mass update feature, just, you know, the child-parent relationship in ServiceNow to send out these notifications. And one of the questions was, how do we notify all the people? That's basically how we do it. ServiceNow has that built in. I promised to keep my talk shorter, but I think I'm running over. This is actually the last slide. So ServiceNow is the tool that we use for all this. And I think I've covered a lot of the questions. Now, Emma, I guess we can go into the Q&A.
Sure. It's Q&A time. So let me start with a question for Sally. How did your communication improve? Did it improve for the entire campus, including students, or just for distributed IT, or it was only for central IT?
Yeah, so actually I was reading through the questions while they were coming up. They're great. So I'm gonna actually answer a whole communication. It'll cover 2 or 3 questions there. Our communication improved because we sort of centralized our communication channels. So we use a number of different tools. We use Slack. We use quite a few of the ones that other people have mentioned on their presentation, but we use Slack internal to IT to communicate, hey, we think we see something on an active issues channel in Slack. Everyone, there's 500 people subscribed to that channel. So the people that might have something to do with it will then jump in and say, yep, I see it, or no, I don't. That's internal to IT. That gets a major opened much quicker than it used to. When we communicate to our customer base, which does include students, if it's student-facing problem, we will typically use our status dashboard, which I put a link to in the chat. That's an external board that's not connected with our systems at all. So if everything crashes and burns on campus, we can still get to that system status page. We also have really close partnerships with the support group that supports the students, and they do use some social media to communicate out to them as well. And that's a variety of different things because it is difficult to get the students to pay attention to IT on campus. So there's a number of different ways that they go out on social media to make those announcements. That has to be something pretty big for us to go out on those social media sites to say that. What else was I gonna say? I think the biggest improvement, back to the original question, I think the biggest improvement for us is that we clearly and on a very regular cadence get communication out to keep people updated on what's going on. So not only is there communication going out initially to say, hey, there's this, there's a cadence then assigned, usually we're in agreement with whoever the communication lead and the incident manager is on what that routine will look like. Is it Wi-Fi and it's semester start and faculty can't even get on to teach? That's going out every hour. If it's Kaltura and there's 20 people that have reported, that might be a once a day or a couple of times a week until it's resolved. It's decided per incident. So, but it's consistent and it's on more channels than we ever used before. So there's many avenues that we can get that communication out. I hope that answered those questions.
I would just add that, you know, we could have a whole other session, by the way, on just IT comms, right? On just like communication in general. So, and that of course is not this, but just related to major incidents, in my humble opinion, the most important thing you can do is have an IT comms point person, an IT comms manager, whatever you want to call them. But a single person who's, you know, in the war room. Here's the problem with the war room concept is what will happen is all the executive leadership members will get in the war room and they'll be asking questions and they'll be getting in the way of the people actually trying to solve the problem. So you need to be able to tell them, guys and gals, get out of the room. We have an IT comms person here. He or she will keep you updated, and provide appropriate summaries of what's going on at executive level. And that will help the technical people in the war room who are there to collaborate on solving the problem, actually collaborate and solve the problem. So, but if you don't have that IT comms person, it's understandable that you're going to have a bunch of people in the room trying to get statuses, right? Your CIO is going to want to be telling the institutional president what's going on or whatever. So, but if you've got a comms person who can inform the CIO, who can inform the directors, whatever, then you've got that covered. And likewise, they can communicate to the broader community as well, right? They can manage the communications, which is the key. So that role to me is like probably the most, besides maybe the incident manager, you know, him or herself, that having an IT comms manager is really critical.
Thanks.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a little bit of chatter on the channel right now on the chat about put a cadence at the end of your message for when the next one will come out, and absolutely do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is also for you, Sally. So in the Aruba situation, the question is, did you keep the major incident open throughout the time you were working with the vendor?
Yes, so we do, because customers are still affected. There is a problem ticket open for this Aruba one already, because there is remediation that's ongoing in the middle of the problem on Aruba's recommendation. But it's still customer facing and they're still being affected. So the major is going to stay open until the customers no longer see anything going on. The problem may stay open longer, but the major, as long as it's customer facing, still will stay open.
Yeah, we do the same thing. And I'll just add that for me, keeping the major incident open is just simply sort of an administrative tracking detail in ServiceNow. A bigger question for us was, how long do we keep stuff posted up on the status page? How long do you tell people that, hey, occasionally calls are dropping? And we err towards keeping it up there the whole time. Unless it's something where we know that there's either a workaround or it's not going to be resolved. And then we'll change that and say, here's the final resolution. Sorry, this isn't going to be fixed, or check this KB article for a workaround.
Thanks, Dave. So the next question is also for you, Sally. How do you maintain team focus as problems drag on without resolution in the case of Aruba Wi-Fi?
Yeah, that's a tough one. The service desk got really fatigued with this one because the calls just wouldn't stop. When I say calls, that could be email, a ServiceNow ticket, or a phone call. But they're used to it. They power through. The network team, more difficult. There's a very small team here. There's only 4 people really that are touching this one. And again, when there is a little bit of downtime, give them time to go recharge. Even though the major's still going on, they've got to recharge because it's been going on for months now. So they hand off their role as they go and have some downtime. And sometimes that downtime is only an afternoon, but anything will help. They're very dedicated people, I will say. And they want this to work and they want the customers back up and running. So it's not as hard as you think when you've got really dedicated people.
Thanks, Sally. This next question, there was some discussion in the chat as well. So this is related to how do you differentiate between problem and major incident? And Mark talked about that while he presented as well. Anybody want to further chime in on that? There are discussions on whether it is proactive, reactive. It can be both, kind of.
Yeah, I would agree.
Want to add anything?
Go ahead, Mark.
No, please.
I would agree that it can be both, right? It's proactive, and that's actually very beneficial to try to prevent the major incident. Harder to do, harder to get people to do, harder to get people to find time to do. A lot of times it is on the back end, like this Aruba one, where we have the problem open and we're actually implementing some of the quick changes. So it can be both, depends on the incident.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's generally right. I would just say that I think a lot of people inappropriately, again, in my humble opinion, equate incident management with operations and problem management with engineering. And while that is often sort of an affinity, that is not even close to being an absolute. I would say much more likely, it's better to say incident is reactive and problem is proactive. And so when it's appropriate to have some activities that might, cross whatever that might be the intersection of those two things, more likely than not, if you're dealing with a major incident, by the very nature of a major incident, it is entirely a reactive exercise. So I think the mistake some institutions make is they think, oh, well, this thing now needs to go from operations or from the service desk or whatever from the techs to the engineers. And so thus it is problem management. That is not, at least by ITIL definitions of incident and problem management, the correct way to really view this. It's problem management, like I said, something that happens in a purely proactive paradigm. It's something that you're looking at data, you're looking at past tickets, not in the throes of an incident, and you're assessing service viability and uptime and those kinds of things, and you're taking proactive steps to to thwart those issues. So I think that's the distinction. I think that's the reason why those two things are often kind of confused and muddled, but I think that's the way to look at them.
Yeah. So Mark, let me just add on Adam just asked a question here, the difference then between problem and change. And there really are three, right? So change is a third, and you really cannot muddle problem and change. Change is a being of itself.
Three distinct things. Yeah. I mean, change is all about, change, by the way, is also proactive, right? The idea, unless it's an emergency change, but let's not go there. But change in general is also a proactive process. The idea of change is just documented change, not only for the purpose of avoiding conflicts, right? Because you don't want to be making a network change and a database upgrade at the same time, because you can't get to the database if the network is being upgraded. But it's also a thing where when there's a major incident, you can go back to the change calendar immediately and say, okay, what's changed? Like, did we do some upgrade last night at 3 in the morning? And that's why this morning at 7 a.m. the email isn't coming back up, or like the change management calendar is critical. But that's a separate thing from incident. And again, we could spend a whole session on change.
I agree. We could. That'd be fun, actually. So one of the comments was problem management is both proactive and reactive. And I agree in the sense that, yeah, you don't have a problem unless you're reacting to some kind of incident. But the intent is that, going forward, you want to prevent that from happening again. Change is really sort of a truly exclusively proactive thing where you're trying to prevent changes. But change management, also the change management process owner at UC Davis, so I could talk about this for a long time, but you want to document it. You want to make sure that you have the proper notification, that you're talking to upstream and downstream stakeholders, that all the right people are involved, and you've asked all the right questions. And then, of course, you want to look at your change calendar to make sure there aren't conflicts, so you're not taking down the network while you're patching systems. One thing that we do actually that has proved to be really useful is we have a Slack channel called Change, where every single change, whenever you start it, you just simply say begin change, whatever, a short description, so that if something happens and poof, you lost connection to the VPN or whatever, you can go right there and see if anybody's working on something. ServiceNow has a nice change calendar, but it's a whole lot easier to look at a Slack channel to see if something's working on something versus pulling up ServiceNow, finding a dashboard, trying to present that. So that's another thing that we do which helps a lot with major incident management, because you can basically see what are the 5 things that changed in the last day that could be impacting us.
By the way,
that's a terrific idea. Yeah. And I'll just also add that we keep these processes somewhat separate as well. So we work the incident, and then when it's resolved, then it moves into the problem phase. And that Mark was alluding to this earlier, that it keeps everybody's focus on solving the problem, not trying to figure out what too much what caused it, or what happened. So
incident is like putting a splint on a broken leg to walk somebody out of the woods, right? And problem is actually doing surgery on the leg to fix the broken bone, right there. You don't do surgery in a reactive thing. That's a very proactively, well, typically, unless again it's an emergency, but that's a different thing. Back to the change thing, I would just add that really mature organizations, and by the way, I'm not necessarily claiming to be one, but really mature organizations take the change calendar even beyond and intersect it with the organization's count, with the actual institutional calendar of events, right? So you want to make sure you're not just performing a network upgrade when someone's trying to do a database upgrade, but outside of IT, don't do a network upgrade when, like, during finals week, right? So you need to also have sort of a campus events integration with your change calendar to kind of really make sure you're not negatively impacting something outside of the realm of just IT.
I want to address one of the questions that I saw in here, which is how do you engage the teams and SMEs that are involved in resolving the incident to be proactive in documenting it? And part of that is really our major incident management. We have an incident review every single Monday at 9 a.m. that is broadly shared with everybody. But then the Friday before, we send specific invites to folks saying, we're going to talk about this, make sure that you're there. And that's where we go through the major incident ticket to make sure that, and we can kind of fill in the gaps, but at that point, all of this should be documented. And that's kind of where we have like a peer review to make sure that everything's included in there. And then problem management ultimately is a final step where you kind of dive deeper. I have to say though, that really only works if you have the buy-in of your peer managers and the SMEs to actually attend. So a lot of this is you have to sell this to leadership to sort of enforce and make sure that people realize the value of this and are encouraged or required to attend if they're involved in an incident.
Well said.
Thanks, Dave. So Lisa, the next question is for you. What product did you use for the service status page?
We're using the ServiceNow. So we drive our status page out of ServiceNow.
Okay. And there was another question on if any of you use social media accounts for major incident process to communicate. And I think Ian from Birmingham, UK said they use Twitter extensively to update students on major incidents and outages. Any of you want to chime in on if you're using social media in any of your institutions?
I think we've covered that a little bit. So status page IO is what we use for posting that links to Twitter. There's been chat around certain groups, or we actually have a Reddit channel. So if we really want to go out and talk to people, that's there also. But one of the key points there that has been mentioned is we have a separate communications team. So they can kind of judge where this stuff is supposed to go based on the criticality of the incident, and we leave that up to them. What my team manages is really the status page, which is like the generic message. But if it reaches that level where we want broader communication, we involve them, and they have the social media at hand.
Dave,
Okay.
I thought your last TikTok video, by the way, your network outage was
It was great, right?
Yeah, that was awesome. Kidding, of course, folks.
So the next one is a related one where we talked about various channels for communication. I would just touch upon second part of this question, which is how do you determine which channel to use for what purpose and who is involved in developing and approving these communications?
So again, we could have a whole webinar on communications, and that's the beautiful thing about this is that honestly, my quick and dirty sort of snide remark answer is I don't have to worry about that because the IT communications manager has to worry about that's a whole IT communications thing, right? So that they have to, like Dave said, they have to kind of make the assessment. If the incident is something that involves, the res halls, well, then obviously that's something you want to target probably students, and which means you probably want to target student social media platforms and things like that. If it's something that affects I don't know, something that only affects staff or only affects faculty, that's a different audience, so possibly a different set of communication channels. Obviously, executive leadership warrants sort of a very specific sort of communications protocol. So I think that's why you have to have a skilled, actually trained in the art of communications point person to actually make those determinations. And that's not something you want to be deciding about or worrying about in the midst of a major incident. That's something you want to be able to defer to a skilled communications manager, who presumably, by the way, has established protocols. Again, talk about pre-major incident activities. Those sort of communication protocols should probably be established in advance, right? Of trying to put out a fire.
Okay. So the next question is, how do you recruit new major incident manager when you need to back up the staffing level to your original one? I think, Lisa, this was touched upon in your presentation.
Yeah, and that's an interesting question because people move on, they take different roles, and so we go essentially back to the well. So we go to the leadership of the various groups, the enterprise technology services, the application services, and we say, okay, well, we need some new people here. We haven't had to do that much because we started off with a big enough group that as if people had to drop off, others were able to cover. So we do have fewer people on the communications coordinator role, and so we did have some move from being a major incident manager to being a communications coordinator. So we balanced it out that way. So it hasn't been a problem yet.
I was just going to say, but this is a really good question, and that it points to the absolute need for bench depth, right? Like you can't have one of anything, especially in these critical roles. So if you have an
Right.
incident manager, you darn well probably better have a backup incident manager for when that incident manager is like in Europe, during one of your critical incidents, or an IT comms manager, right, who occasionally will be sick or take vacation or whatever. You should probably have a backup IT comms manager, right? Service
Mhm.
owners probably need a backup service owner, right, for large enterprise critical services. So, and of course, these are tough times, and everyone's doing more with less. So that's an easier thing said than done. But obviously, you have to assess like what are the most critical roles in your organization, and make sure you don't have just one of those. Like bench depth in those critical roles is pretty important.
Yeah, I'll second that. And one thing that we've done, so we don't have a dedicated major incident manager. That would be lovely. But honestly, these things don't happen so often that we have to really get involved and spend that much time on it. Most of it was coming up with the process and the flows and coordinating. Once that's done, you still go through some CSI. Oh, I suppose I should like emphasize that. As we go through this, both in change management and all the rest of the stuff, none of this is absolute. It's not like we come up with this and then it's like, written on a stone tablet. If it turns out that it's not working right, you have the power to go in and change your processes and do it differently. So, but that said, one thing that we did in order to back me up for the major incident management role is these notifications go out to the entire management team. So if I'm unavailable, someone else can step in. And usually it'll be the service manager, or if I go on vacation, I'll designate a specific backup to cover my services. So we don't have a dedicated major incident manager because there's other positions I'd rather fill. But there is a backup mechanism, which is absolutely critical.
Yeah, but just by the way, for clarity, I should have said role versus position. Like I agree with what you said, Dave. Like we don't have a dedicated incident manager, and that's their sole job either. But it is an incident manager is a role. We have somebody wears that hat when that hat needs to be worn, and we have somebody who can wear that hat if that head is on vacation.
Right.
But I think you're right, though. That's an important clarification. I don't. For people who are thinking, wow, these guys have dedicated incident managers and comm managers. No, sometimes your comm manager might be your web content, main person or whatever, right? They could be there might be a position that has to have that role when that role is needed. So I think that's an really important distinction, Dave, that you brought out.
So the next question is, I think Dave covered this in his presentation, what tools are used for alert notification? So if others want to chime in.
Say the question again. What
tools are used for
tools?
alert notification?
Yeah, I think we've all kind of covered the tools that we're using extensively already, and they're presented in the slide decks. So
yeah, a lot of the ITSM platforms have this built in, but if not, you can buy these adjunct. Atlassian has status page, and so you can buy adjunct tools that will generally manage the propagation of a status message, out to various other channels and social media platforms and calling trees and whatever else. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of whether you make that part of your core requirement for your ITSM platform, something robust like a ServiceNow, or whether you bolt that onto a more bare bones service management platform. Both are options.
Okay. So this question is for Lisa. How are you defining the pop-up screen to indicate that it may be a major incident to the person raising the ticket? And I think there's another question also related to that, where they are asking, is it IT staff that is logging incidents and they get the pop-up, or how many channels do you have for incident tickets?
Yeah, that's a great question. And while people were talking, I did find a screenshot, so I'm going to share that real quick. So this is actually a screenshot from a Slack conversation, because as we go, people say, hey, they recommend changes, so we work on tweaking things as we go. So this is the latest one, and so when you do create a major incident, it asks you, okay, are you ready? Here's what's going to happen. So it does give a lot of text to somebody, but also the green and red buttons to really indicate, yes, we should move forward to trigger the major incident process, or no, our standard incident process is going to be enough. So, this is what we have in front of people right now, and it seems to be working out pretty well.
And very Christmassy, I might add.
Yeah, we went bold with the green and the red.
Very intuitive.
And I see in the chat a lot of other people also have chimed in on what they are using at their institute, similar to your process, Lisa.
Yeah.
By the way, I see some questions around communications templates and things like that. And again, you could do a whole webinar on IT comms, but I would just say, again, that I think that's part of the proactive planning. Obviously, you're going to be better situated to act quick in an emergency if you've thought about the different kinds of outages you might experience and the different kinds of communication you might want to convey. So to have templates in advance obviously is a great idea if you have the resources to be able to to be that proactive. So I would just say, of course. But again, I would just sort of defer to an IT comms professional or communications professional in general to kind of develop that toolkit for them.
Okay. And another question on contact lists. How do you all manage contact lists for the people who need to receive the updates? Is it managed through a specific system?
Yeah,
Yeah,
this is Sally. That's a problem for us. It requires constant care and feeding, and we don't have a person dedicated to it. We probably should, and it's a great question that I don't have a solid answer for.
I was just going to say, in general, your ITSM platform, most of them should help you manage that list, at least to some extent. But yeah, you've got sort of list of folks outside of that ecosystem. And in general, like we rely on like our primary departmental admin assistant to maintain and manage that list, make sure that it gets propagated, that it's on a shared, cloud drive that everyone can get to, in the throes of a crisis and all those kinds of things. And again, a lot of us download a lot of that stuff on this because you never know if that shared cloud drive is the thing that you're having a major incident about. So you always have to think, one step ahead of the major incident, and kind of make sure, oh yeah, crap, what if we can't get to, that resource?
Yeah, we rely on our service owners to manage their kind of list of primary contacts. So we fall back to that a lot. Sally, we're like a little, oh, I wish we could do better at this, but it does need some management, it does need some help. And when in doubt, we tend to go big. So we'll post something on the Bruin Tech Slack channel, and we'll send something to the Bruin Tech list where we know most members of the community are there and can take that information, and then we refer back to the status page. So, it's a little messier than we like, but when in doubt, we throw it out there, and people can figure it out that way.
Yeah, I think it's a generally good rule of thumb to over communicate versus under communicate, right? Like, I mean, that over communication isn't great, but it's better than under communicate, especially if you value your service desk people and don't want them to be inundated with, a million calls per hour. Then over.
Yeah, I've been answering some questions in the chat. One of them is related to this. We often get hung up on delaying notifications as a technical wording for the message, and how do you deal with that? We've had that before too, and there was one incident where our comms group, we said all messages should come from the comms group. Well, they spent so much time debating about the wording of the message that it was a day later after the incident was closed that we finally got the notification. I'm like, okay, that's not going to work. So we've again empowered the help desk to basically post messages saying at least we're aware that something is going on, and then we can modify that message later on. And what we struggle with is the frequency for these kinds of updates, because if nothing, oftentimes people are working on it for hours, and the rest of the community is trying to figure out, well, are they even aware? Is someone working on this? And do we post up every 30 minutes, every 2 hours? What's the frequency in which we update saying, still working on it, still working on it? That's something that we actually struggle with.
Yeah, which is why the status page idea is so cool, because that's a pull versus a push, right? So you're not aggravatingly pushing out the same information every hour. But the other thing is, back to the template thing, is that's why having templates in advance is so important, so that people aren't spending their time kind of wordsmithing an emergency, but instead they've got presumably a canned template that for the most part gets them 90% of the way there, and so they can hopefully be quick. But those are good points.
So the next question, how do you engage teams and SMEs who are involved in resolving the incidents to be proactive in documenting root cause, post actions, timelines, and all those stuffs?
I mean, again, for me, it's making sure you get the SMEs and other appropriate resources in the same room, often same virtual room these days, and it's doing simple things like having a note taker in the room, right? In addition to and usually that's somebody that the comms manager brings along, by the way, because the comms manager is ultimately accountable for making sure that that stuff is documented. So they'll bring along a note taker, just take diligent minutes. And like I said, it's as easy as hitting the record button, at least for for post-major incident documentation. Obviously, in the throes of things, you're not going to be watching a recording, but so I think having someone that kind of take notes and document stuff is important. But I think the idea is you get the SMEs in the same room. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why we chose to use Zoom for our war Zoom versus using the Teams video capabilities. Is yes, the Teams platform is great for like storing artifacts related to the incident and sharing drawings or whatever you might need to share quickly. But Zoom allows you to do like breakout. So if you're dealing with a really complex problem, you got to get like the network group in one breakout room and maybe the wide area network group in another room, then you can do that with Zoom. Whereas, you might not have that capability in some other, and Slack, obviously you can create, channels, under and sub channels. So I think the idea is you want to try to mimic what you would do if you were all face to face at any given time. You might face to face, people would go off to a different room, right, real quickly, and so they can get peace and quiet and just focus on a particular aspect of a problem. So we can accomplish that with some of these virtual platforms.
Yeah, one of the things we were faced with when really implementing ITIL and change management and major incident, I'm very big on you're not touching the system unless there's a change ticket for it. And so we have admins saying, okay, I can either reboot the server now and fix the problem or spend 5 minutes doing a change ticket and then going through approvals and all that. So, kind of the taking everything together that we've discussed here in terms of documenting and all that and Zoom messages, I agree that we don't want the fix to be held up by kind of the bureaucracy of stuff, but we also don't want to lose track of it. It is incredibly important to track these things because how many times of the problem's resolved and then you're like, okay, well, what fixed it? I'm like, I don't know, we did all these different things. So what I will do for my staff is I'll tell them, you go ahead and do that and I'll take care of implementing the change ticket and tracking it. Or at least make sure that you write in the Slack message, hey, I'm rebooting the server to see if something happens, so that you can then later on document that and pull that back into the ticket. And I mentioned this before, the major incident management ticket is kind of our gospel for what has happened. So it's the service manager's responsibility to make sure that all of that stuff is pulled in there from the different sources, whether it's from taking notes or Slack or just simply collecting all the sort of various change tickets that are out there and making sure they're collected in one place.
That's a great point. I mean, definitely, obviously, that's why you have emergency changes, right? If you need to make a change immediately, you still want to document it, but you do it as an emergency change so that you can kind of do it immediately without a bunch of bureaucratic approvals. But you also want to make sure, to Dave's point, that you don't, if you're implementing changes, you don't want to do them all at the same time because then you don't know what fixed the problem. So you got to kind of organize even your emergency changes to kind of make sure you're doing them in a way that you can actually figure out what solved the problem, so that you can document that and make permanent improvements to the service or the infrastructure or whatever. So it's also important to manage changes, per Dave's point, in a reasonably, whatever serial way. You can't implement a bunch of changes at once because then you don't know exactly. They might step on each other, or again, if all of a sudden everything's working, you're like, well, okay, I'm not sure exactly what fixed it, but we made these 8 changes, all in the same time window. Well, that's not really very helpful in doing diagnostics and forensics. So.
Okay. So the next question is, when using Teams, do you use same war room for all incidents rather than separate room for each incident?
Yeah. So in Teams, I'm sure since the question is about Teams, I'll address it. I'm sure in Slack you have the same capability with like sub channels, but so in Teams you do have under each team group you have channels, so you can create. So what we do is if there's a major incident, you immediately create a channel that has it's sort of a date stamped, 2022-11-21 network outage, and that becomes the channel for that incident. So and the artifacts get stored in the file section of that channel. So yeah, it's not one sort of free-for-all, perpetually existent war room. It's a war room with each major incident, sort of separated and isolated, just for that reason. So you don't have all this, massive confusion, artifacts from 18 different MIs over the year, all that kind of stuff. Not that we have 18 MIs a year, but if we did, that would be a problem.
So, Mark, question to you. I think there are a lot of questions here. We have 10 more minutes. So is it possible to pull the log of the questions that we may not have answered that we can answer offline?
Yeah, I'm certainly willing to commit some time to looking at questions and sort of emailing. Maybe we could collectively, compile a summary of questions to send out along with the slide deck and the recording.
Okay.
In terms of follow-up, we're gonna, part of what our contact information is there as well. I don't mind, talking about this offline, or even just having a meeting with individual teams that are trying to sort of mature through the process. That helped us out tremendously, having that available as a resource. And I imagine I see heads nodding that we would all be willing to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not to say that any particular way is the right way to do it. You kind of like look at what other people are doing and then figure out what fits your particular environment.
Exactly.
Okay. So we may have time for 2 more questions, probably. So this is again going to the problem management and major incident. So this question is asked, like, if you are using ServiceNow, is there automated way where problem management item is created for a specific major incident ticket, or is it done? Is there some decision-making process involved in creating problem record?
There was a question that I kind of answered in chat related to this. I don't know if there's an automated way. If there were, I wouldn't want to use it, because not every major incident requires problem management. And so what we do is we have our Monday morning incident review meetings. If a switch fails because a power supply blew up, that's going to be a major incident, but you're not going to do a problem review on it because you replaced it and you're done. What we focus on for problem review is really kind of process failures. If there's something where we can change how we do business to prevent this from happening again. So we sort of have that discussion in the major incident management meeting to make the determination of whether we then move on to problem management. And then ServiceNow does have a problem management module that we use where we track it. We have problem tasks and we assign them to different folks. And then we build reports on that to see how much progress we're making in actually following up on those and resolving the issues. Yeah, to today's point, again, we should not conflate incident escalation with problem. But today's point in his example about this, a network switch power failure or whatever, a power supply failure, for instance. One network switch power, maybe it's a really important network switch, maybe it's a core router, whatever, and so it's, you had it created a major incident. But that has nothing to do with problem management unless you start to see a pattern. Oh my God, we have a lot of core routers that are losing power supplies on a regular basis. That's problem management, but that's way after that's data analytics post incidents, whether they're major or not. So again, we have to be really careful not to conflate, major. Yeah, I will add to that example, once you start talking about core routers and things like that, it could be you might want to take this to problem management, even though it's just a router failure, because maybe what you want to do is ask the questions of, is everything architected properly to prevent this from happening, prevent this kind of impact. So really, those are the decisions and conversations you have at the incident management meeting to make that determination on whether it goes to problem or not. Yeah.
Okay, so what metrics or measure do you have to measure the success of major incident process?
So that is one thing I actually had in my notes to cover. One of the whole reason why you're doing this is to sort of improve your availability and prevent these kinds of things from happening. So we just use lots and lots of reporting in ServiceNow. So some of the metrics, I have a whole bunch of dashboards on the number of changes, the change-related incidents, the changes that were successful. And once you're in incident management, you're kind of, beyond that. It's happened. really where I focus on sort of deriving success metrics from is with change management, because we want to make sure that the changes that we're implementing aren't driving incidents. So CRIs are really important, and the success and failures of the various different ones. And that's actually, it's difficult for people to kind of, I won't say honestly, but completely track these things. So that's something that we also do in the major incident management meeting, is when we have an incident, we look to see where the change was that created this, if it was related to a change. And then we make sure that that ticket is updated also, because sometimes you close a change and you say it was successful, and you find out a week later it in fact caused this major incident. You want to make sure that that's linked, because these metrics are really, really important. And in our organization, that was something that was frequently lost. We would run a report and everything looked rosy, and we realized we're not creating those linkages. So that's critical. Another thing that I'll add there is nomenclature is really important. I wish we use CIs properly. We don't. We kind of use them as business services. Well, if you're not tracking them, if you're not assigning them to the proper groups, if people are calling one thing DNS, but another person recalls it, they think that was related to DHCP, now you end up with reporting that doesn't show the full picture. So really kind of agreeing on the nomenclature on how you record these things was critical for us as well.
Yeah, I think most things come down to human error or system error, whether it's hardware or software, right? And so I think that's the distinction. Human error stuff better have a change associated with it, or it's gross human error, right? And obviously sometimes things just break. It has nothing to do with any planned change or anything, right? So that's a different kind of, so obviously one of those metrics is just things like, mean time between failures, right? And uptime in general, right? Those kinds of sort of performance metrics, right? Those are just obvious things that are sort of outside of the change process. But to Dave's point, that's why the change process is so critical as a planning and incident avoidance process, is to manage change well.
Yeah, I don't want to tout change management too much in a major incident management talk, but they are very closely related. There is one thing that I'll add in terms of metrics, and my group used to get slammed for an outage. Like, we'd make a DNS change and poof, all of a sudden a critical service would go down. And we would get slammed for that. Another thing that happened with change management and all the metrics and the reporting that we're doing is now we're able to report on all the successes that we have also. So we can say, yeah, we understand that, and we'll focus on it. And of course, it's something that we're going to review and try to prevent in the future. But in the meantime, do you realize we've done like 20,000 DNS changes this year that went well? So you can kind of put the context around it so that people understand there's a lot of work that's being done here that is done well and successfully, and these are the anomalies. And of course, we'll work on those, but don't just focus on the bad.
That's awesome.
Okay. Maybe a quick last question to Lisa before I go to the closing comment. So you mentioned Slack and Zoom during your presentation on major incident. Is there any integration for those tools, or are they totally separate and worked out separately?
We have one kind of an integration between ServiceNow and Slack, and it's on our kind of wish list of things that have so much potential, and we want to really explore more there. But when a major incident is triggered, it sends it to the Slack channel. So there's not a whole lot of integration like back and forth, but it does post something so that alerts people in the channel.
If you go to Slack apps, but if you go to Slack apps, there is a Zoom for Slack.
Oh yeah, we use the Zoom for Slack.
Yeah, so you can sort of launch a Zoom from a Slack, conversation Slack channel.
Yeah, so we do that. We launch Zoom from Slack. So Slack has been kind of our point go-to place, where it used to be email, which was always awkward. So moving everybody into Slack where we can, all focus, and we use one channel for all of our major incidents right now. There's been a lot of talk about, maybe, doing one channel per incident. So we may get there, but for now we all just pile into one place.
Thanks, Lisa. So for all the attendees, there are quite a few questions we couldn't get into. We would look at the chat log and work through on the answers, and we would also send our slide deck with contact information, so each of you can contact any of us for any offline discussion. The panelists said they are open to it. So this concludes our panel discussion. I would like to thank the panelists for sharing their time and insight with us today. They have been very kind enough to provide their contact information as well. We are always looking for fresh ideas. So if you have any idea for a webinar or have a desire to present, I just posted my contact information in the chat. Please contact me and I will work with the ITSM's communication group steering committee to coordinate a discussion with you all to make it happen. That's how we made this session happen. So as I said in the beginning, we will be able to post the recording in 5 business days in the ITSM communication group wiki site. And again, once again, I would like to thank the panelists and also thank you all for being in attendance today and asking thought-provoking questions. See you all until our next event. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, folks. See you guys.
Thank you.